Thanks very much, Stroud. It's a pleasure to be here. So Stroud started with a question, how many finance people are here? And there were two. I'm going to ask, how many companies are here? How many company representatives? So you guys are the leaders in the private sector, and that's really excellent to see. I think finance is catching up, but your leadership is very important because for the most part, or for a large part, you're the companies that the finance companies that I work with invest in. So if you show leadership, then slowly but surely they will see, you know, why is this company looking at this? Why are they disclosing risks around biodiversity, ecosystems, climate change? And maybe we should be looking at those things also. So I'm going to talk about what's happening in the finance sector generally, and I'm going to actually start with my conclusion. There's a dramatic shift happening in the finance sector, both on a systemic level and at an individual level. In banking, investment, and insurance, companies are more and more looking at environmental issues. I think we have climate change to in a way, thank for that. The political focus on climate change is moving the focus on environmental issues from pockets of excellence, so because there are some really good companies out there, but it's pockets of excellence, into the mainstream. I think after climate change, companies are going to ask themselves, okay, what's next? And probably the next is water. And then they'll think, okay, what's the next after that? Probably ecosystems. So I think we're going to see a dramatic shift in the interest from the finance sector, and I really do hope that at the next Business and Biodiversity workshop we will be a lot better represented. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about a systemic shift, and I'm going to talk about a individual work that finance institutions are doing. So it's sort of the top-down and the bottom-up shifts. UNEP has been, for the last 2 years, working on a design of a sustainable financial system. So it's a 2-year exercise to look at what is happening all over the world in financial regulation, both soft and hard regulation, what's happening in standards, what is the work being done in order to create a systemic shift to support sustainable development by the finance industry. The report was launched last month, the global report. There's about 40, 50 reports being launched. So various countries are being covered, various themes are being covered, and I certainly encourage you to pick up the ones that you might find interesting. Now, why did we look at these types of issues? Well, in simple terms, there's too much brown and not enough green. There's huge amounts of assets being available for investment all over the world in bonds, equity, and other types of assets. But in terms of what is needed in order to shift the finance industry towards a more sustainable path, it's, according to the inquiry, manageable. So there's about 16 trillion in infrastructure investment, and that needs to be go towards green investment. There's 7 trillion in externalities in companies, and those needs to be shifted towards more sustainable path. At the same time, there's 6 trillion that is needed as a reduction in fossil fuel investments, which we're already seeing happening in various divestment campaigns around the world. I mean, 16, 5, 7, 6 trillion, it sounds like a lot of money, but in the whole grand scheme of the investment industry, it's manageable. So I think that's one of the first lessons from the inquiry, is that we can actually have a shift, a systemic shift, towards the finance industry supporting sustainable development. So they looked at what's happening in the world, creating a sort of overview of examples. China. So greening a country's financial system is not an additional performance. requirement, but concerns the efficiency and effectiveness of the whole system. And they're looking at things like green credit guidelines and a green financial system. The UK, the central bank time horizon is relatively short, but the real challenges to prosperity and economic resilience from climate change will manifest well beyond this. We face a tragedy of horizons. Now, this is from the governor of the Bank of England, a guy whose main task is to look at something as boring as financial stability. But now he's seeing and arguing that climate change is part of his mandate in financial stability. And that's something that, at a systemic level, becomes very, very, very interesting. So in the report, the inquiry has developed a toolbox looking at what exists out there in terms of enhancing market practice, things like disclosure, responsibilities, and product criteria, looking at the public sector balance sheet, policy measures, and also transforming culture, because financial sector culture, let's be honest, it's not always directed towards the public interest, and so that's a very important part of transforming the financial sector. They've come up with a number of policy packages which can be used in order to direct finance towards more sustainable functions, and also develop a framework for action which can be applied at a national level. So those of you out there who are looking for sort of national action plans on how to create a sustainable financial systems, look at the work of the inquiry. So the conclusions of the inquiry. Financing for sustainable development can be delivered through measures focused on the financial system. There's a quiet revolution they're seeing. There's a lot of policy initiatives happening, not just in China and the UK, but Brazil, South Africa, and other areas that demonstrate how a financial system can be better aligned with sustainable development. And all of these actions taken together represent an opportunity right now to build on these and create a sort of global move towards more sustainable financial system. The work under the inquiry is obviously more broad than just biodiversity issues, but it certainly includes it as part of the conclusions, and also there's several references to management of natural capital, for example, in the finance sector. So that was the top down. Now I'm going to look at the bottom up. We often get questions from financial institutions, well, that's all very well in theory, but how do we do it in practice? So we just released a couple of months ago a tool to integrate water stress into corporate bond valuation. It was sort of a test project that we were working on in order to see, well, what can we do with one ecosystem indicator in one asset class? And our intention is to broaden this into all ecosystem indicators, biodiversity ecosystem indicators in most asset classes, which is a project that we're just going to start now. But looking at this one, we had a number of good project partners working with us who were giving input to the project. And what we were essentially trying to do was combine three sources of data. So we looked at global data on water stress, which we got from the WRI, and we used that to calculate a shadow price for water at each production location that exists for the companies that we looked at. So we find that depending on where a company is producing their particular good, there's very large variability in the shadow price of water there. I mean, we're not assuming that they will eventually have to pay the shadow price of water. There's various ways in which water stress can be internalized. Price is one of them, but it could also be availability of water. But this is more a tool for the financial institutions that were involved to see, well, how can we address risk specifically from water stress? So we combined that with locations and water use that the corporates have, and put that into corporate credit information, which is, I think, the easiest way for financial institutions, financial analysts to understand how this might be a risk. We found that for the companies that we looked at 24 companies in 3 different sectors. There was a huge difference in how exposed they might be to water stress. So a company like Rio Tinto, which is a large integrated mining company, would face a blended shadow price of water of almost $9 per cubic meter, whereas a more specialized mining company focusing on gold and platinum like Anglo is actually not that exposed to water stress due to its production locations. So we took those and obviously integrated it into credit analysis. I mean, we looked at financial ratios mainly, and in order to try to connect this to a credit rating. Financial ratios is just one part of a credit rating analysis, but it is a fairly important one. There's all sorts of other considerations that go into it. But for example, if we look at 2 companies in the mining sector, again, Rio Tinto being, as you see, very exposed to water stress based on this shadow price. Their leverage, so in this case a financial ratio that is used in credit analysis, increases dramatically using this kind of analysis. Similarly, for a company like Vedanta, which is already fairly stressed in terms of their leverage, would see it rise to above 4 times, which might start to question whether they're still investment grade. This does not constitute investment advice. It's a way of it's an example of how to integrate a theoretical risk from an ecosystem indicator into credit analysis. So don't go and short Rio Tinto on this information here. So I mean, I think the conclusion from this type of analysis is that, as you probably know, just as well as I, the water stress is high and increasing in most parts of the world, driven by overuse of water, but also climate change impacts. Companies, well, not just companies, but everybody's going to face pressure to internalize costs, but perhaps especially companies, because in the sort of hierarchy of who should be allowed to access water, I think a lot of companies recognize that they're not necessarily at the top. And we've seen some companies responding to that by abandoning factory plans in areas of water stress because they just realize that there's going to be a difficulty in accessing water in certain areas. And because of these cost internalization pressures, companies in certain sectors, in certain regions, we're not talking all companies in all regions, but certain sectors, certain regions may be negatively impacted. And for financing companies, this is going to be a risk, perhaps also an opportunity, in order to see which companies are particularly exposed to this type of risk. So back to my sort of opening statement, my conclusion. We're seeing a shift in how financial institutions are responding to environmental issues. We're seeing it most in climate change at the moment, where it's moving really from certain individual companies being really focused on climate change risks to it becoming more mainstream. We're seeing also an increased interest from individual companies wanting to participate in projects such as this to try to understand how these risks can be used in financial analysis. I mean, Frank was talking about the IFC performance standards, and they're great, and they're used by many companies around the world, but they are almost a minimum standard for whether a project should go ahead or not go ahead. And I think sort of a natural complement to that is trying to integrate risks from biodiversity, water stress, water quality, soil quality into the financial analysis in order to see what does that do to the cost of capital, the internal rate of return of the companies. And that's a lot of the work that we're moving forward with right now. At the same time, I mean, there's always questions, why should financial institutions care about this? I mean, the business case is sometimes tricky for why they should be doing this. The systemic shift that we're seeing is helping. The interest, both from civil society, consumers, and others on environmental issues, especially climate, is also helping. And a lot of companies also are starting to see, or, I mean, as I said, there's pockets of excellence. So a lot of companies have also looked at this from a risk and return perspective. You know, what can I do in conservation finance, in restoration finance, in order to have a competitive advantage? So, you know, there's companies also that are looking for opportunities to work on these issues. So I think all of this is incredibly encouraging, and it's certainly a privilege to be working with these companies and to be here to tell you all about it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anders. It's really good to hear that the finance sector is catching up. And if climate change is the first motivation, you've demonstrated that water is indeed a big area for concern. And it was really interesting to see how some companies are so exposed to water that their operations, like the gearing that you showed, and I'm sure other financial indicators, really get out of bounds if you consider water stress, which could already affect some investment decisions of the more risk-averse investors already today. And it'd be interesting to see how that shift continues afterwards from water and moves to ecosystems. Are there any questions from the audience for Anders? So, Caroline and the gentleman over there. Okay.
Good morning, Wijnand Broer of Krem in the Netherlands. Not really a question, but probably an addition. Talking about the tools that have been mentioned, in December there was also a guide be launched in the Netherlands on financial institutions and natural capital. And it will basically refer to the different strategies that you have as a financial institution, ranging from exclusion, ESG integration, impact investing, etc. And it will refer to the different tools that have been mentioned here as well. So also the VCA, the IFC performance standards, the water tool, and also other tools that are being used. It will probably also be in the newsletter of the Natural Capital Declaration, and probably also the Natural Capital Coalition will pay attention to it. It's been funded by the Dutch Ministry of Economic Affairs. Yeah?
Thank you. My name is it on? Yeah. My name is Caroline Bosmeyer from the Biodiversity and Good Company Initiative in Germany. I have a question. Yesterday we discussed briefly the importance of data availability, sharing data in the context of the environmental profit and loss discussion. Now, having a look at the results of your study, for example, Rio Tinto is facing comparably high risks. Was it taken for granted for Rio Tinto, for example, to really be transparent about this, or was there a discussion if they should publish this? Because it says something about corporate risk and the situation of the company, and maybe, well, important to investors, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I think that I think the response to that is that this is one aspect of a financial analysis. Now, what this doesn't take into account is how the company is responding to it, how they're managing it, and what they're actually doing. Rio Tinto could be managing this risk incredibly well, so that means that they wouldn't necessarily be exposed to water stress in those areas. Maybe they're building desalination plants, which of course is an additional capital expenditure that would have to be put onto the financial statements, but maybe they're managing it incredibly well. I think that these types of tools are, and some of the financial institutions involved are already doing it, it's a great conversation starter with the company. So I know that some of the financial institutions have already taken this to some of the companies and said, listen, we have this analysis, you might agree with it or not agree with it, but can you tell us if this is something that we should be worried about? How are you managing these risks? And also by sort of bringing the location-specific analysis back into financial analysis, because in order to do this, we had to look at every single mine location for Rio Tinto, for example. And there you can really see a big difference. Some mines are not exposed at all, and some are very, very heavily exposed. And then you can see, you can dive deeper. What are you doing at this specific mine? Should I be worried about this mine? Might it have to shut down, which would then affect the revenue of the company? So, we haven't, unfortunately, had a lot of time to talk to the companies about this specific analysis. It's something that we certainly are open to and definitely would like to. We've been contacted by a couple of other companies and they want to discuss it with us. But it's something that investors then can also use to start conversations with the companies. So I hope that answers your question.
We have two final questions, and then we'll move to the next speaker, and whoever has more questions will go into the discussion. I also see one online, but this requires a longer discussion, so we'll wait till later. Thank you.
Hi, Salla Hoinen from Salla Hoinen from CDP. Hi. Just to maybe add to the previous question, there are already good platforms where companies can actually disclose how they are managing the risks and what kind of risks they should be looking at the river basin area. So I think just to add that there are good solutions already how companies can disclose the information to follow up.
And CDP is one of those platforms.
Exactly, thanks.
Yeah, hi, this is Sophie Gagan from GIZ, Germany. My question is, we see a lot of that the market of impact investing is rising, and more impact investors are searching for investable objects, and there are high challenges for them to find those investable objects. And we also see that those investors and the funds are often mixed, and the private capital is for the fund and the technical assistance is provided by the public sector. So do you see that there is that there will be also a market where also the private sector, private investors will provide money for this technical assistance in order to bring those not yet investable objects into a state where they are investable?
I mean, in a lot of, especially new, innovative projects, technical assistance is needed, and impact investing is one of them. Impact investing is fairly niche and specialized, and I think that's also why it's difficult to find good projects with good revenue streams in that market. I mean, there are some examples of conservation finance and restoration finance out there, but they tend to be very small. I think that investors are generally looking for supporting the investment, what generates the revenue stream, and it's a very competitive market out there. Investors don't generally have a lot of extra funds to put into technical assistance. So I don't really see that there would be a lot of investors giving technical assistance. It's possible, but I don't really know. I mean, in our work, we had we had fantastic support from the financial institutions, and they gave a lot of time to the input, but they didn't give any money towards it. And actually, it was financed by BMZ through GIZ, so thank you for that. But no, I don't really, I mean, from my personal perspective, I don't really see a lot of investors getting involved in technical assistance.
Thank you, Anders.